address the individuals who are going to be visiting Africa, engaging Africa. They must understand that Africans are equal to them. But when one goes to Africa with a sense of superiority, wherein lies the problem, because you are not going to engage those leaders who are going to come to the table as equals. You go in feeling superior, you come back feeling superior. That is not an issue with the Chinese. The Chinese are coming in. The Chinese, yes, if you don't negotiate with them and they win the game, then that's your fault. But they don't come in feeling superior. They understand that Africa has something they need. So they will come to the Africans. They will come and make sure that they let the Africans know that you matter to us, that our relationship with you does matter. That you don't get that feeling with the United States. You get the feeling that there's this sense of superiority, that you Africans, you ought to be glad that we are engaging you. You ought to be glad that we are inviting you to come to Washington. That sense of superiority, it has to change. Whether it calls for the United States to retrain their people as they engage Africa, but it is that which really goes to the bottom of why the engagements are not going to be as effective. They must take a page out of what Africa is doing. Let me say this. Chinese people didn't used to be that way, but they quickly changed their strategy. When they realized that the game they were playing was not going to work in Africa, they changed their strategy. And that's why, like I said it during my tenure, I'll continue to say it again. If this was a basketball game, the United States need to call for timeout. This is a new game, and it requires new rules of engagement. The United States must, first and foremost, make sure that racism is out of the picture. Africans are just as smart as anybody else. Africans are equal. And until we engage as equals, all these meetings, all these conversations are always going to be useless. And it goes back to the individuals who are going to be at the table with the Africans. So the U.S. also need to address the issue of racism and make sure that the people engaging Africa, their minds are clear and they accept that Africans are equal.
Tell us about Pan-Africanism. Tell us about what Africa, the states in Africa are doing to trade, to connect, to move their agenda forward proactively, no matter what the rest of the world is thinking about it.
Absolutely. I have to say, if you were to go back to 1963, when our Pan-African fathers came together in the hopes of creating an Africa that spoke with one voice, an Africa that had one military, an Africa that had one central bank, one monetary fund, one stock exchange, and an Africa with one customs union. We failed at that over the years. But finally, 2 years ago, they approved the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is a policy that saw Africa coming together in one particular area, that we are now speaking with one voice when it comes to trade. Yes, its implementation is a monster. Yes, its implementation is work in progress. But you can say of the issues that our Pan-African fathers met to discuss in 1963, finally, over 50 years later, we are able to accomplish the first one, which is being an Africa that's going to the world as one customs union. The spirit of Pan-Africanism, it has taken us a long time to really begin to come together, to dismantle the Berlin Conference, which, of course, for those who think, oh, Berlin Conference is a thing of the past, think again. As long as we have a country called Togo, as long as we have a country called Congo-Brazzaville, Eswatini, Malawi, those small countries, even Nigeria or the big ones, Kenya, Egypt, Morocco, they cannot survive on their own. As long as we're talking about the little-bitty individual African countries, we are never going to realize the dream of a united Africa that speaks with one voice. And until we dismantle some of those borders, until we begin to wake ourselves up as a people, until we begin to realize that the colonizers and the rule of divide and conquer left us feeling inferior. Supremacy, white supremacy was introduced from the very onset when the colonizers came to Africa. We were taught to believe that everything African was bad, everything European was better. And we still continue to suffer from that mentality. So yes, while we demand that the West and those who don't look like us Africans treat us equally, realize that we are human beings just like they are. We too, as Africans, we have a lot of work to do on a personal level, where we must also believe, truly believe, that we are equal to everybody else on earth, and that we are capable. That also is a disease that we need to realize as Africans. Let's wake up and realize that white people are not superior to us. Chinese are not superior to us. We are just as good as anybody else. That is a serious challenge, because we still have people, even when you look at issues that we could stand up as a people and push back. You see ministers from the Western world going to Africa, and they basically can. I've seen them say some of the most ridiculous things to the Africans, and instead of the Africans pushing back and saying, "Hey, hold it, this is not going to fly," instead the Africans are afraid, just inherently fear of the white person, for no good reason whatsoever, except that we have been programmed to feel inferior. So on an individual basis, we continue to speak the gospel of truth. We continue to shed the light as to the brainwashing that the African has been put through, wherein lies the problem. When you look at what is being done at the World Bank, for example, the Bretton Woods institutions, the frivolous loans, countries that have never defaulted on their loan repayments, and yet they're still given large interest rates. Why? Countries like the United States that don't need any help, they get loans at zero interest rates. You look at the issue. I'm glad President Biden, I hear he's going to be talking about having the AU as the 51st member of the G20. Well, let's also take it to the next level. Let's go to the United Nations. Let's have Africa, 1.4 billion people. They need to come to the table. Let's African Union be the 6th member of the 5-member UN Security Council. You can't just totally disregard 1.4 billion people because you've gotten away with it for centuries. Well, guess what? Game is over. Africans are waking up. Africans are beginning to realize and understand the game that have been played. Unfortunately, we don't have that critical mass of people who are continuously going to speak truth to power. The good thing with the story of Africa is we are coming from a position of righteousness, a position of truth, a position of facts. Those are constants. They don't change. Let's continue to give the world an overdose of our truth, but at the same time, while we are doing so and demanding a world that is fair, that is just, and free of racism, bigotry, and hate, we must also work on our own development and our own awakening as a people.